First question is, can you tell us about how your journey with the music began, your interest? Well, I remember falling in love with classical music when I was in primary school. The local music service came round and performed in our assembly. And I remember thinking that it was just so amazing that all of these people who had completely different skills on different instruments could come together and make one sound, one piece of music. So I just thought that was incredible. I must have been about 8 at the time, and the music service then came back in and did these pitch tests where the highest scorers got chosen to play an instrument, and I chose the oboe at the time. But I fell in love with double reed instruments, and I always knew after kind of trundling down to the local library that I wanted to play the bassoon. I just thought it looked so quirky and cool and a bit like a chimney sticking out of the orchestra. And there was no other instrument like that. Like, all the strings, you played them slightly different, but they all looked the same. Oboe looked a bit like the clarinet. The flute was just very, very common, but I'd never seen anybody playing a bassoon. So I knew that was what I wanted to do. Was there a teacher or family member who encouraged me early on? What kind of impact did they have? Well, I think that all of the people who have taught me at every single stage have been massively encouraging, huge inspirations to me. The first one was back in primary school, Mrs. Gladding, who saw this love of music, saw that I had such a love and an innate sense of music as well. And she kind of really encouraged me to take up an instrument. And then I guess my first bassoon teacher, who was also my first oboe teacher, Lydia Dolby, who's now a very good friend of mine, she was always encouraging, always kind of looking for opportunities. And I mean, we were from quite a poor family, so she used to sell me my reeds. She'd make them for me, but she'd sell them kind of much cheaper than she did for everybody else. My A-level music teacher, Victoria Wells, who I'm still in touch with now, was a massive influence for me. She was the one who really kind of showed me what a career in music could be as a musician. She was the one who introduced me to orchestral rep through CDs back then, and kind of just what it meant to be a classical musician. And then there's all my bassoon teachers from Royal Northern, Steve McGee and Graham Salvage and Dave Chatwin. They were just, in completely different ways, encouraged me to keep going and carve a place for myself as a musician. What was it about the bassoon that drew you in? I think I've already said that. It was just, so what happened when I took up the oboe is I used to go down to the local library and just read books about musical instruments, because I was just fascinated by them and all the different types of instruments and how they make their sounds. And at the time there was a thing, you could pay 20p to go onto the library computer for half an hour, and I used to load up this disc called Encarta 95 and listen to all the different instruments. And I remember the bassoon excerpt was Sorcerer's Apprentice. I just remember thinking, not only does it look really cool, this big tall thing that kind of sticks out at the top of the orchestra, but also it sounds really cool. And then I found out about the contrabassoon as well, which is like the auxiliary instrument, which I found out was the lowest instrument in the orchestra, bar the organ. And so then that was just like, oh well, that's really cool, I want to do that. So that was it. I was just captivated by the quirkiness of the bassoon. Can you remember a moment that you realised music could actually become your career? Yes, I can, very clearly. So when I was 16, I was on something called the Gifted and Talented list, and there was like a handful of us in high school, 10 of us maybe, and it was at the time that the government was pushing higher education. So they were doing these higher education summer schools. And I initially chose to go to a summer school for French, which I'm so glad I didn't anymore. Unfortunately, I cannot speak a word of French now. And I'm not sure how helpful it would have been back then. But instead, I chose a music summer school at the Royal College of Music. And it was there that I discovered you could do music as a career. I had no idea that you could do this as a job. And it was coming back from that week, and it was such an influential and amazing week. But it was coming back from that week that I decided I want to be a classical musician. This is what I want to do. But I remember talking to my careers advisor in school, and I said, "Oh, I want to be a classical musician." And she was kind of like, "You've got to be really good to do that." And I walked out of that meeting thinking, I'm going to prove her wrong. She doesn't think I can do it, and I'm going to make sure I do. You do so many different things: performing, presenting, advocating. What does a typical day or week look like for you, if such a thing exists? Such a thing does not exist. As you can see, I am in the Radio 3 studio. So this week is a week of being on air in the afternoons, but my weeks change so different. It's so different every single week, because I'm not on air every single week. I do, I think, like 18 weeks a year, um, but it varies massively from playing, and playing in and of itself. There's so much variation what I do there. I could be in with an orchestra one week, or doing an education project another week, doing a concerto. Then I am currently interim deputy artistic director with Chineke. So there is a lot of managing artistic relationships that happens there, being involved in lots of different conversations with the team, with projects, and seeing where they're all up to, making sure they're moving forward, deciding what music we're going to play, doing research and finding music, or even commissioning music by Black and ethnically diverse composers, making sure that's kind of at the forefront of what Chineke does. Uh, then I also chair the members' assembly in the musicians' union, so I could be having meetings about really big, important things, from the right to freelance musicians to women's safety in classical music as well. So um, it's a real big mix, and it changes a lot of the time, and I'm very, very lucky, and it's incredibly satisfying. So yeah, I love it all. There is no typical week, and that is a thing that I love as well. I'm never in one place for too long, which means that it never gets boring ever. So next question: how has music shaped who you are, both personally and professionally? How is music? That's such a tricky question, because it definitely has shaped who I am. I think one of the most profound things for me about music was that my tribe. I found a group of people who I relate to more than anybody in any walk of life that I'd been through before. I remember it was during sixth form, I joined the school band, and that was the first time I joined a school band. And there were just lots of like-minded people, um, people who kind of. It's not even about my sense of humor, but just people who, because none of my friends at the time were musicians, but people who got that dedication to music and that kind of want to get better and things. Um, Beyond that, though, it's the foundation of everything that I do. It's, from the activism to the performing to how I think and talk about music, and how I interact with people. It's defined who I am. It's how I define myself. I think if music was to be stripped from my life tomorrow, I'd have a really hard time of figuring out who I am without music. So it's the foundation of everything that I. It's the foundation of how I see myself, and I think a lot of people will relate to that, because for so many of us, our instruments are the foundation of who we are. They define a lot about us, and we relate to people a lot of time through our instruments. Was there a concert, piece, or artist that changed how you thought about music or its power? Yeah, lots of different people have influenced me at different times of my life externally. However, I will say, actually, the one person I've had to, who has influenced me the most, and this sounds a little bit narcissistic, but it's myself, in the sense that it took me a very long time for me to. I mean, we all get this, the imposter syndrome. I've had it. I still have it now, to this day. But it took me a very long time to believe that what I had to say as a musician was important, and as important as what anybody else had to say. But also that what I was doing, and when I was, it took me a long time to believe that what I was putting out there as a musician was good and was worthy. And I'd say I'm coming up to my 40th birthday. I'd say that's only really happened in the last couple of years. And the funny thing is, everybody else in the world either isn't thinking about that or already believes that you're uh, a legitimate musician, or at least that was a legitimate musician long before I did. So that was a yeah. I and the belief in myself has been the most impactful uh, person on me, if that makes sense. Have you had a moment where you saw music change somebody else's life in a really powerful way? Yeah, lots of times, all the time. That's the beauty of music, whether it's just somebody sitting watching a concert or in an education setting. And actually, one of the most transformative bits of work that I used to do was for an organisation called Music in Hospitals, and two really powerful occasions for me in that setting, where we went into a nursing home where um, one of the people in the nursing home, one of the women, had Alzheimer's, and we started playing a piece of music. It was just an arrangement of something, and this lady just started moving and dancing to it. And all the nurses were kind of calling each other to come in and watch, and we didn't really think much of it. But as we finished that, um, they said, "This is, we'll call her Alice. Alice hasn't moved in 2 years. She comes, she sits in, she doesn't say anything, she doesn't talk to anybody, but she was responding to that piece of music. I think it was a piece from like the 1950s that we were playing, but there she was responding to that piece of music that obviously stirred something in her memory. And then the other was a little bit sad, but we were in a respite center for young kids with cancer, and we were just playing some music, and there was one child in particular who was just having the time of his life, and it moved me to tears, knowing that this child was terminally ill, but we were bringing him some joy, um, and it was really hard, but a really beautiful moment. So you've been involved in Chineke for a long time. How do you describe its impact on you and the wider classical music scene? Well, I'll say this: before Chineke came along, I'd never played or heard of any black or ethnically diverse composers. And I think that what Chineke has done has bring a lot of those composers to the fore. And I honestly believe, and it's a very bold statement, but there's a lot of composers, Florence Price, Samuel Coleridge Taylor, William Grant Still, that um, other professional mainstream orchestras wouldn't be playing if it hadn't been for Chineke. So Chineke has done a huge amount to shine a light on those composers who I think is really worth mentioning as well. Their exclusion from the classical canon wasn't by accident. So Chineke has done a huge amount to correct that. What does it mean to be part of an ensemble where inclusion and representation are at the heart of the mission? It means loads to me, because that's everything that I strive to do, is to make sure that not only classical music is accessible to all people who want to listen to it, but also that classical music as a genre is an accessible job, and that people can feel like they belong. For a long time before Chineke came along, I always felt a dissonance being in classical music and being a black musician, and I didn't ever quite know how to articulate what that was. I didn't really know what that was, and when Chineke came along, it really highlighted that there was a lack of other people that looked like me in classical music. So it's done a huge amount to make classical music be more inclusive for both players and for people who are listening. It's a bold thing to say, but perhaps I wouldn't be where I am doing everything I'm doing now had it not been for an ensemble that champions diversity. And that's why it's really important. In what ways has Chineke influenced conversations around race, identity, and access in classical music? I think I've covered that a little bit, but I think just being an ensemble that puts that at the core of its mission, it's meant that that has had an effect on the whole industry. Um, it's boldly saying this music has been ignored but it's not because of the quality. These musicians, these composers have been ignored, and that was always a conscious choice. So Chineke's put those composers on a platform and said, listen to this, listen to it, because it is good quality. It's good quality music. It's as good as the other composers that we celebrate, and it's worth celebrating. And I think that is how it's influenced it. Beyond that, in terms of race, it's made us have a bit of a look at ourselves in the classical music industry and say, how are we being exclusive? How are we excluding people? And how can we make sure that that doesn't continue? And lots of places are doing lots of really, really good work to change that. And that's really uplifting to see. It's great to see the next generation coming through in the likes of Chineke Junior Orchestra. So many talented, incredible, black and ethnically diverse musicians who are going to make our industry that much more rich. I think that's the important thing, isn't it? You know, it's not a pie. It doesn't, because somebody else is getting a piece of what we're doing, it doesn't mean there's less for you. It just means that there's more for everybody, and that's a brilliant thing. How has my own heritage shaped my approach to music and work more broadly? And have there been times in your career when your identity has felt like a challenge, a source of strength, or both? So there's a very famous story that I always tell. When I was 8 years old, I remember watching The Proms on the BBC. I watched it for like 3 nights in a row. And I remember walking into the kitchen and saying to my mum, I don't think I should do classical music anymore. And she said, why? And I said, because I haven't seen anybody that looks like me. I haven't seen any black musicians. So maybe it's just not what we do. And I think beyond me making that statement, there was something really quite profound about an 8-year-old boy being able to recognize that. So I've always been quite strong-willed. So when I decided I was going to go into classical music, that was what I was going to do. But I'd be lying if I didn't say that there were times when my own cultural heritage, and even times now where I feel like my own cultural heritage doesn't have a place in conversations about classical music. And I don't mean, you know, I'm half Jamaican. Does Jamaican music belong in classical music? It's not about influence. It's about whether me and the cultural upbringings and the traditions of my Jamaican background can be part of who I am in rooms with other classical musicians or institutions of classical music. And sometimes that is a hard thing to. I'm a lot more forthright and stubborn about being myself and the full myself in a lot of those places now. But even now, I think classical music likes to hold certain traditions which are sometimes outdated. But I always find strength in, and my family make sure they would keep me grounded, and I always find strength in who I am and all aspects of who I am culturally. What advice would you give to young musicians who don't see themselves represented in classical music? It's out there. There are classical musicians just like you everywhere. And if there isn't, carve that for yourself, because that is your superpower. If there is nobody else like you in an entertainment industry, that is your absolute superpower. And you carve the way, and you be that influence for somebody else. Your uniqueness is your USP, your unique selling point. If you don't see yourself, you make sure you get up on that stage and people see you, so that anybody else who does look like you or is like you in whatever way can be empowered to follow in your footsteps. That's what I'd say. What skills or qualities do you think are most important for navigating the classical music world today? Well, you'll hear something more and more now when you're going into classical music, which is a portfolio career. And that is, you know, many people don't just play classical music anymore. They do, they're not just freelance or even orchestral musicians. They do lots of other things on the side. I would say if you have a passion for something else, you know, keep it up, make sure, and find ways to to blend those passions. So I do a lot of illustration as well, and I very often will combine my love of illustration with my love of equality in classical music. A couple of projects that I've done, for example, are women composers. During Women's History Month, I drew a new woman composer every day and compiled a playlist. I did the same for Black History Month. Find ways to innovate using the things that you love and combine them into music as well. Yeah, being able to combine the things you love, ultimately make money out of them, yes, but also get satisfaction. That is the main thing you should chase in your work life. So as I said right at the top, I do lots of things that all give me massive satisfaction. So being able to combine all of the things you love into doing something that really, really satisfies you, that's the most important thing. If I could give my younger self a piece of advice, what would it be? It's really, really weird because a lot of people look back at their younger self and say, do this, do that, do this. I would say to myself, do everything that you were going to do, because everything that younger me did has led to me being here now. And I think if younger me could meet older me now, younger me would probably be in awe. But I would say to younger me, you did this. All of the decisions you made, all of the mistakes you made, all of the directions that you took, every decision, every room that you decided to be in, younger you has got you to where I am now. So I would say to younger me, thank you. Keep doing what you're doing because you get me to where I am. Quick fire questions. What was the first concert you ever went to? Probably that school concert. The I can't remember what the first proper concert I went to was, but I think it was probably actually very, very early concert that I went to was at some school I told you about before. It was a proms concert at the Royal Albert Hall. I can't remember what was on the programme, but that was probably the first kind of big concert moment that I can remember. Is there a piece or song you never get tired of? Goretzky's Symphony of Sorrowful Songs. Oh my gosh. It's just the most beautiful music. Incredible. Coffee or tea before a gig? Neither, because it makes me wee, so I can't drink anything for about half an hour before I go on stage. So no drinks, no liquids for me before I go on stage. If you weren't doing music, what do you think you'd be doing instead? I did actually. I started. So possibly illustration and animation. However, after about 5 or 6 years after leaving music college, I did go back and enroll in a medicine degree. And I did the first term and then got a job with an orchestra. So I decided to come back to music. So there you go. Possibly illustration or medicine.